Hi all of you, hi YouTubers. Today is December 24th, 2020. How's it all going for y'all? It's Christmas Eve, so it must be pretty exciting for a lot of you out there. It is for me. So yeah, so for this video, I'm going to be answering a few questions that some of you had asked me, and it's like, seems like makes a lot of sense to answer these questions because I've come across some rather interesting questions here about the general questions and stuff. So the first question here that sounded interesting for me to answer, it's from U-Haul University, and Gino Star did ask me the other day on what's my biggest regret in life to this point. Well, the first thing that came to my mind was selling the house that we used to have in Rialto. We used to live in Rialto at one point. We bought a house. This was back in 2009. We bought a house there. And then later on, gone on to 2015, we lived there for 6 years. So we lived there for 6 years, and then we had our genius idea to sell the house because we wanted to get out of debt, you know. So we sold the house and moved into a mobile home, which was a nice mobile home, but it was like in San Bernardino, somewhere, the mobile home park. It was a really nice park and everything. But to sell the house, so that was a big mistake to do that, because that Rialto house that we used to have, it was a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. And it was a pretty newer, it was like a newer house. I mean, it was like the area was not the best in the world, but I mean, it was Rialto though. I mean, it was not a bad, it was okay at the time when we bought it. But that house was a newer house built in 1978. Then we sold the house because we wanted to get out of debt, you know. Finding out that I feel that's the wrong reason to sell a house for, you know, to try to get out of debt, you know. Anyway, it's like getting out of that house, selling the house was a big regret because at this point right now, like, since housing had gone really expensive over the last few years, when we moved out of the house and moved into the mobile home, we didn't want the mobile home anymore. We just didn't feel it. We didn't feel it at the mobile home, so we decided to go back to a house. We wanted a house again. If you would ask me, what's the big regret about it? Well, it's just the fact that, you know, with all the things that happened and why we chose to move and everything, like, it turned out being like, you know, like the housing got really expensive, and we could not afford anything like as nice as a Rialto house that we had. So we wound up with this house over in San Bernardino. And what's regretful about it is just the fact that I feel like we downgraded ourselves for our foolish mistakes, you know. We made our foolish mistake. We feel like we downgraded ourselves. It's like, you know, we got into a cheaper house, like with 2-bedroom, 1-bath in an area that is talked bad about, like what people think of this area. I mean, so I'm gonna get bombarded about how bad this area is, and that gets quite annoying, you know. That's pretty annoying, and so that's the regret on the fact that we downgraded ourselves for our little mistakes, you know. But I mean, what can I say, you know? Well, anyway, I mean, downgraded or not, I mean, like, this is where we're at, and I'm happy here. I mean, it's already happened, so I mean, we're here now, so I'm happy here. I mean, but it just gets annoying on the fact that a lot of people, like when I mention that we live in this town, San Bernardino, I'm gonna constantly get bombarded about how bad this area is. I mean, that gets quite annoying there. It's annoying when all I hear, is that, it's like, come on, man. So, I mean, you figure, well, maybe it's meant for me to be here in one aspect, and that is, to be able to filter out who the real people are, right? Because real people are not going to be bothered by what city I live in, because that's a stupid thing to be bothered by, what city I'm living in. That's stupid, So, I mean, maybe it's meant to be for me to be here in that aspect, so I could filter out some people, because for people who's not gonna be bombarding me with how bad this area is or how bad the reputation of San Bernardino is, or if people are not, for those of you that don't bombard me, then, that's the real people. The real people don't do that, don't bombard us with that stuff. So, if we're not talking about houses moving out of that Rialto house, some of the biggest regrets I had in my earlier life, talking about my early life, first thing that comes to my mind, it involves jobs. Number one regret, shortly after I finished my automotive tune-up course back in 1989, I was offered a job working on cars, right? Yeah, I've been offered a job through one of those places. And yes, so I said, I want to work. Yes, I want to go there. I want to work there. But the mistake I made was telling them that I was not going to be available until Monday. I mean, I was saying to myself, I should have took the opportunity right away. So I said I was not available on Monday or something because I was too concerned about how my current boss at the coffee shop would feel about me suddenly leaving that job, and I didn't want to hurt their feelings, right? So yeah, I mean, so it was in my heart, to give my old boss, time to find a replacement worker or whatever you might say. So the big mistake I made was, first of all, not taking my new auto shop opportunity right away, not taking it immediately. That was the first mistake, the main mistake. I didn't take the opportunity immediately. I should have went with it. I should have told them I'm available immediately, And don't wait. And the mistake I made also, since I had already made that mistake in the first place, but the other mistake that I made was not realizing that Monday that I said I was going to be available on was not going to be until a week away, because for some reason the day that I said that I'll be available on Monday, for some reason I thought it was Thursday or Friday that day that I said, and it was only going to be a few days, that's what for some reason I thought it was Thursday and Friday and shit. But I told him Monday, so apparently the boss or the manager could not really wait much longer, So yeah, at the end, I lost my opportunity at that tune-up job because I was too concerned about my old dishwashing job, how they're gonna be, how they're gonna feel. I was kind of too concerned, I was feeling heartful, so to speak. That was a mistake I made, Okay, another big regret I have, and this involves jobs as well in my early life. Back when I was working at McDonald's, I hated the stress, most of us do. I hated the stress on the job, and not only that, I was complaining at the time about getting only 20 hours a week, I'm complaining about 12 hours a day now, but I was complaining back then about not working more than 20 hours, I wanted to work full time, 40 hours and stuff, but I wanted more hours and stuff, and plus, I didn't like the job, but I wanted more hours. It kind of contradicts, but anyway, just face it though, there's no such thing as a perfect job though, really. But in the case of being in McDonald's, I really wanted to leave the job. Yes, I really did. So I did have the thought of, however, have the thought in my mind to be sure that I have another job ready, right? Believe it or not, as a 19-year-old, I did have the thought to make sure I have another job ready before I actually leave the job. So at this time, I was feeling confident about this so-called work-at-home program on the newspaper. I found it in the ads. Yeah, like it was kind of like a scam, you know. Like at the time, I was getting all into this newspaper, and I was pretty confident that I was gonna be on the assembling products or something, and so I was pretty confident there. But I mean, anyway, so right there, I was so sure that it was legit, I almost right away quit the McDonald's job, you know. But I pretty much right away, I right away quit the McDonald's job thinking that it was going to be good. I mean, that this thing was a legit, only for me to be hit hard with the reality later on. That you know, reality, like if it's too good to be true, it probably is, because this ad was advertising like earn $400 a week assembling products, you know, something that seemed really easy for me to do. And it looked pretty legit to me back in the time, but I mean, they were kind of like scams, you know, but I mean, I don't know how we call it. They just make it sound too good, you know, so that it can get you to go buy their something. You know, I had to buy a catalog or something in order to start. I had to buy this, I had to buy that. So all the buying, that's the scam right there. You know, trying to get you to spend money so you can get your job or whatever. So realizing not too long after leaving McDonald's, I got upset about how it all played out, you know. At that point, I was now in financial turmoil. How I felt to be broke, I tell you. Back in the time, because like my job, like eventually I started to feel the financial hit, you know, like the turmoil. Like when I left the job, I was not bringing any more, the McDonald's job, I was not bringing any more money that I was used to, you know, no money to buy anything, you know, like the way it feels to have no money for nothing, man. Yeah, I tell you, no one to buy all the things I really like. And in the 80s, life, it was very hard to be without money in the 80s, during the 80s, because, you know, like, electronics, like, you know, they were expensive to buy, so, I mean, you could not really buy it, you could not really enjoy life on the buying electronics aspect without money, you know, so, and then at that point, I was really wishing that I did not quit the McDonald's job. As much as I hated it, I wish I didn't quit it at that time, because then I thought to myself, it was better to work 20 hours and complain about working only 20 hours and getting like $100 a week. It was better getting $100 a week than nothing at all, you know. Yeah, you figure that. So okay, here's another question here that I've been asked that seemed like something that would be cool to put on video. David Godoy says, if I could go back to the 80s and buy something there and bring it back to 2020, what would it be? Yeah, that was a good question right there. And I would say, wow, I mean, if I could go back to the 80s and shop, and then bring it back to here in 2020 with me, bring the things that I bought brand new just right now and bring it back over here, what would it be? It would be only physical items that I could fit in my time machine that I could bring. So what would it be? So the first thing that comes to my mind is like these boom boxes. It's like the popular ones, like the Lasonic ones, like these big Lasonic ones that like, we bought our boom box for like $150 back then, you know. We bought one of those. Shit, if I would be able to go back in time, and I would pick up a couple of those for $150, because right now those things are worth like $1,000 right now, brand new. If someone had this specific Lasonic boombox, these big ones, you know, like the big speakers and very loud and stuff. If someone had one on eBay right now, that same Lasonic boombox that I'm talking about, that we paid $149 at the time for, if someone had that boombox brand new right now, it'd be worth about $1,000 right now. I mean, I tell you, if I would be able to go back in the '80s and buy something, that would be the first thing that would come to my mind. I would buy this boombox. I would buy some of the popular boom boxes. Buy a couple of them, maybe 3 or 4. I would buy 3 or 4 and bring them with me. And I would probably, along the way, I would probably buy some blank cassettes, vintage blank cassette or blank cassettes from the '80s, like brand new, and leave them wrapped up and bring it over to 2020. I would bring some of those as well. But along the way, I mean, I would look at outfits too. I would look at buying outfits too, like maybe like some of these Jimmy's shirts. Remember the Jimmy's shirts and the Rude Dog shirts? They called them the Gotcha shirts, among others. And they had a bunch of others. Yeah, I would shop around and buy a bunch of those shirts. I would buy a bunch of them, as many as I could fit in my time machine, right? And I would bring it back over here to 2020. And either I would wear them or I would just sell them, or I would probably just keep them. And I would definitely buy some of those tracksuits that they had back then, because I like the tracksuits they had back then. I like the nylon type. They had a lot of those back then, and I would definitely be buying some of those and bring them back to 2020. And then and I tell you, and if I could fit like a 10-speed bike that they used to sell with these gum wall tires. Remember those? Like those typical 10-speed bikes that they used to have with the gum wall tires and metal pedals and stuff. Like 10-speed bike, like a regular 10. If I would be able to fit that in the time machine, I would bring that too. I would buy one of those too, maybe 2. Probably a couple of those. Maybe I would probably buy I would buy these gum wall ones. Those are classics. I tell you, I'd buy one of those as well too. But bring it along with me, along with some small toy and collectibles. I would look for some collectibles such as garbage pail kids cards or baseball card or the like. Or if we're talking about '90s, like the Pogs or what do you call it, Pokemon or whatever. I would buy those. I would buy those little collectible thing and buy them over in the '90s or '80s, and I would bring them with me back to 2020. That's what I would do. Those are some of the things that I would buy if I was in the '80s decade. If I had a time machine going to the '80s, and if I could buy something and then bring it back to 2020, those are some of the things that I would. But some things that I could say not to buy. You don't want to. One thing that you don't want to buy in the '80s, like if you were riding in a time machine going to the '80s, one thing you don't want to buy is a camcorder. Don't buy a camcorder in the '80s because you're just wasting your money. Instead, you just bring your brand your camcorder, your memory card camcorder with you in the '90s and make a video there. Or in the '80s, make a video, but just make sure nobody sees you because they're gonna get all excited about you. The scientists may want to take you in if you're carrying one of those memory card camcorders. Or just hide it, or just put a GoPro on your head, or just pretend just decorate it to make it look like it's not a camera, if you're in the '80s, that's funny. Well, anyway. Okay. Okay, y'all. For the next question here, Mark Blanco asks, what surprises me to this point? Or what surprised me, or... Well, I could answer it this way. Well, if I could think, the first thing that comes to my mind, although I saw all this slowly, inevitably coming with the remarkable change of technology and everything, back in the '80s decade, the Jetsons cartoon showed all kinds of futuristic stuff. especially these video phones that they have hung up on the walls and stuff in that cartoon and stuff, and everything being done with the push of a button, like those cartoons and the flying cars and all that stuff. Yeah. And a robot maid, a maid who's a robot. And if we're not talking about the cartoon, back in my day, holding a small pocket size 110 film camera, the snapshot cameras, in my hand, and dreaming I was actually making a video. And this was 1986, I could not see TVs that would be flat, Back in my days, I didn't see that, I could not see how it would be possible, how that would be possible for them to make a flat panel TV, And I was just, I think I probably had imagination or I just had imagination that the TVs are flat so they weren't so bulky, I tell you. I wish back in those days that TVs weren't so bulky because it was always hard to find a spot for that TV, And for the phones and telephones, I only heard of car phones back then. It's like I never heard of a cellular phone. Well, they did have what they call cellular phones, but they called them car phones, and it was only in a car that they were attached to. Well, that was in the early 80s. But in those days, I felt like it was only a millionaire's item. Only a millionaire can own those things. Because they were really expensive. So anytime I saw someone talking about a car phone, or I always think of someone being really rich. But so what surprises me to this point? Well, all the things that were only imaginable back in my day, it's like a lot of this is now reality today in 2020 now. I tell you, back in the 80s, all these things that we have today, I couldn't even really imagine those. I couldn't even imagine that all this would become reality. Those old phones lying around, and then speaking of the wishing that the 110 camera was a video camera. These days, these old phones that you have lying around in the house, not being used anymore, shit, we can use that as my camera. I can use that as the camera. That makes me think of these $3 110 pocket cameras that we used to have, these old phones that you might have lying around in 2020. But in 1986, I was holding a $3 110 pocket camera, snapshot camera, wishing it was a video camera. But these days, these old phones you have lying around, that don't have any value. You can use it as a full HD camera these days, I tell you. They're everywhere these days, So yeah, that makes me think every time I see an old phone lying around. It makes me think of that 110 camera, those little 110 pocket cameras that we used to buy, these snapshot, where we had to develop the film and stuff, yeah. Video phones are pretty much normal, although we don't have these video phones on walls like the Jetsons, but we have the FaceTime, and that's pretty much a video phone of the Jetsons, It's like the Jetsons pretty much right there, But to my surprise, it's so many other things we could do now. That didn't even register. That didn't even come close to registering in my mind back then that we can do. Like doing everything online, like shopping and paying bills, talking to friends online, FaceTime, finding an Uber, and going to the app on the phone and buy groceries, and then they bring it over here. We could buy groceries online. We could do just about everything, these days. The works, In the case of someone from 2021, or if someone from 2020 came to me in 1986 and told me about all these things that 2020 has, it sure would have the biggest surprise to see that in me. It would be the biggest surprise to me, I could tell you. That all the things that I was only able to imagine had become reality. You know, that's like that's the biggest surprise right there. Okay. For the next question. Okay, Redemption Films asks, how did it feel to be a Gen X, Generation X, me, who's born between 1965 and 1979? Well, as a Generation X myself, 50 years old, born in 1970, so I fall in that category, Generation X. So, how did it feel for me to be in this and to be a Generation X back in the 80s? Or just in general, like in today, how do I feel today about being a Generation X? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is how it feels to be a Gen X. It's like the appreciation of the remarkable change of technology, you know. Yes, I mean, the remarkable change over the many years, you know. Just think about it. As a person who was a teen in the 80s, me, decade, where we were in a land of expensive electronics, you know, expensive camcorders and like everything the only rich people were able to afford, you know. So, and shitty wages too. Like we had the $3 an hour job, you know. As a Generation X, I lived in the $3 an hour wage. Life was a big challenge for me in those certain aspects, you know, basically like the money aspect, you know, like the available things to buy, electronics and what was available to buy, you know. So apparently I grew up remembering all this, right? So I remembered all this, you know, I mean, growing up apparently as a Generation X. So this comes to the next part of the answer. How did it feel to be a Generation X? It can be fun. It can be fun in the aspect of telling today's generations how we lived. That's fun. It's fun to talk about that. You know, it's fun to talk about how we lived during the 80s decade, you know. You know, like without the cell phones and all that technology we have today. Talking about how I lived without all this. It's fun to talk about all that stuff, you know. But of course, another aspect on how it feels to be Generation X, I feel appreciated that we now get to live an easier life now. I mean, that we have all this convenient technology. For me, I love how I can pay my bills without the bother of getting stamps and paper or like the paper checks, you know, without the bother of all that stuff, you know, writing out the checks. And I love how we can FaceTime anybody anywhere in the world, you know. That's what's nice about it. That's like the appreciation part, like the things that we can do today. It's all about appreciation, like feeling the way I feel, like that I'm appreciated, that I don't have to live like the way I did, like the kind of life that we had, although we lived through it and everything. But I mean, it's just I love how I can shop at home and find just about any imaginable item I want, without the trouble. I like how, I mean, the appreciation of not having to go through the trouble driving all over town to find that specific item and stuff, you know, only to find out that they don't have it, you know. I mean, I love that's the appreciation that I feel about it, you know, like, yeah, so, what else? And ultimately, you know, like, how it feels to be in Generation X, like, you know, the ultimate state-of-the-art electronics that are practically free compared to the 80s electronics that were only mediocre at best. So where does it all come to me? Feeling appreciated, pretty much. I mean, I feel and how it feels to be in generation feeling appreciated, because we lived through the 80s, right? So I mean, the some specific negative aspect of the 80s, like the shitty wages and like we feel appreciated in today's time, because like electronics, for that example, is a lot cheaper now. Like it's practically free, and these TVs are state of the art compared to the best TVs from the 80s, for an example, that were only mediocre at best, and that high definition TV and the state of them, I mean, like the cheapest TV today that you could buy for like a few $100s is state of the art. It's state of the art already. I mean, yeah, I tell you, man. So now for another aspect about how it feels to be Generation X. As a 50-year-old living with the new generation of people, the attitudes, well, as I see it, we all see it, the new generation are definitely living differently than us, basically, kind of differently in some ways. But, the first thing that most of us are going to notice about today's generation is the cell phones. We're all pretty much glued to the phone. I mean, we're all are. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're young or old. We're all glued to the phones now. But I mean, it's hard to be without a phone, though. Really, I mean, even me. I mean, I can't be without my phone myself, I mean, because it's just too convenient. I mean, for me, I do everything on my phone, like shopping, and it's convenient, So, well, anyway, but then, how do I feel about this? Well, I mean, it's cool, I say. I mean, I say it's cool. It's today's times after all, right? I mean, yeah. With this going on these days, with the past time I was used to living then, I just have a little tendency to feel left out sometimes by the society, because I mean, I like to talk about like how things were, how I lived through the 80s and stuff, but I mean, everybody, like, since everybody, like, it's like today's technology or today's generation or just today, it's not like how they're not living like the way they used to. I mean, and it's gonna stay the way things are with the phones and all that. It's gonna stay. I mean, there's no way that's not gonna change. It won't change. So I mean, anyway, so since there's really no way these days to convince people, like these days, to appreciate what they have now, because the new generation, they did not live the 80s decade to know what it was really like, what it was like to be without the phone. So I mean, well, anyway, I mean, that was one aspect. So okay, so for the ultimate conclusion for my say on how it feels to be a Generation X, me, as a 50-year-old, born in 1970, how I feel overall. I feel happy to say that I lived the 80s, and I experienced the 80s, and I made it through the 80s. That's what I can say. I mean, it's basically appreciation, on how things are today. I mean, that's the quickest thing I can think of. I mean, of the answer on how it feels to be a Generation X. But I mean, yeah, I mean, so anyway, I mean, so this will conclude to this video. So I hope you liked this. So, and I hope you have a good Christmas Eve today. And I'll see you on the next video. I shall do live today for sure. I gotta do live today. Maybe I'll probably do it right now. I mean, I'm gonna probably do it now since I don't have a lot to do, so I'll probably do it now. So yeah. But anyways, okay. See ya, Gilbert from YouTube. Alright.